Good morning, students. Today we are going to discuss the next topic in esophagus, that is motility disorders. There are various motility disorders, and one of them is achalasia. So today's interaction we are only focusing on achalasia. In the previous interaction, as you already know, we have discussed paraesophageal rolling type hiatus hernia. So let's start with achalasia, one of the important motility disorders of esophagus. Just remember, when we are discussing motility disorders of esophagus, these two important points must be there. If patient is complaining of difficulty in swallowing, that is dysphagia, and there is no esophageal stricture based on history and examination and other investigation, the only thing is patient is complaining of dysphagia. Along with, on barium study, the barium impregnated food bolus is there sticking with the esophageal wall. These 2 points are there. We must suspect some motility disorders in the esophagus. Along with these two important points, patient may be having pain. Sometimes dysphagia is not there. Only pain is there, and it could be the only presenting symptom in achalasia and other motility disorders also. And before coming to the conclusion that this pain is because of esophagus, usually we are going to do extensive investigation of that patient to label it as the esophageal cause. Usually the patient is having intermittent symptoms. Sometimes patient is fine. Sometimes he or she is complaining of these symptoms. And so we cannot correlate the symptoms with the abnormalities of the test. It's not very well correlating. So in this case, especially the motility disorders of esophagus, we should not be in hurry to do some sort of surgery. If the condition is not clear, the diagnosis is not confirmed, we should not opt for immediate surgery. Sometimes it may going to harm the patient. And sometimes the patient is complaining of some, let's say, epigastric pain or distension of abdomen or constipation and other symptoms of gastrointestinal function, and it is extending and presenting to us with esophageal dysmotility. It could be a part of that generalized GI symptom, and sometimes it is associated with gastroesophageal reflux disease, as we have already discussed the gastroesophageal reflux disease and its management. So sometimes this group of diseases, the motility disorders of esophagus, may be associated with GORD. Now try to understand this table, especially made for all of you. Now here we can classify the esophageal motility disorders basically into the 5 groups. There are 5 columns in this slide. The first of all, the disorders of pharyngoesophageal junction. We are going from the cranial to caudal end of the esophagus. The pharyngoesophageal junction disorders, then body of esophagus is affected, the disorders of body of esophagus, and the disorders of lower esophageal sphincter. These are the three important groups depending on the site involved. And apart from these three groups, there are two other groups. The fourth one is autoimmune disorders, and the fifth one is allergic disorders. Now in first group, disorders of pharyngoesophageal junction, we are having two important subgroups. One is neurological and another one is myogenic. In neurological, the motility disorders could be due to stroke. Actually, all these conditions we are going to have in differential diagnosis. We must rule them. These different conditions, we must rule them out. So in neurological, stroke, motor neuron disease, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease. In myogenic subgroup, the myasthenia, the muscular dystrophies, and Jenkins diverticulum, the pharyngoesophageal diverticulum. These may present as dysmotility disorders of esophagus. The second group, broadly two important things are there. Disorders of body of esophagus, bodies involved, that is diffuse esophageal spasm and nutcracker esophagus. Important for your PGME point of view. Then the disorders of lower esophageal sphincter, the achalasia. This achalasia we are going to discuss today. And GORD, incompetent lower sphincter, is there. GORD we have already discussed. So today we are going to complete this disorders of LOS, followed by autoimmune disorders. One of the important syndrome is there, CREST syndrome, again important for your PGME. C stands for calcinosis, then R Raynaud syndrome, esophageal motility disorders, then sclerodactyly and telangiectasia, the CREST syndrome. In this autoimmune disorders, sometimes it is associated with reflux associated, that is GORD, and idiopathic. And finally, there are two other causes may lead to dysmotility of esophagus. The allergic one, there is eosinophilic esophagitis, and there are some conditions, the non-specific esophageal dysmotility. Now, something related to this functional pain and esophagus. Basically, in these patients, pain is basically due to two important things. Maybe there is some abnormal motor activity in the gastrointestinal tract, and sometimes activity is normal but abnormal perception is there. And the third combination could be presence of both the abnormal motor activity in the GI tract as well as abnormal perception, leading to presenting symptom as pain. In these patients, there are very high pressure, uncoordinated contractions, and it correlates with the pain. Terminology is there, that is visceral hypersensitivity. In this visceral hypersensitivity, we can prove it by inserting a balloon in the esophagus, and if we are going to distend the balloon, inflate it, due to local or central neuronal dysfunction at that particular site, the threshold is low and patient easily sense the pain due to this neuronal dysfunction at the local level. This is known as visceral hypersensitivity. A small distension of the balloon, severe pain is there. Now just focus on achalasia now. We have discussed the classification. The third group, the disorders affecting the lower esophageal sphincter. Now we are focusing on achalasia. Means, just remember, failure to relax. The lower esophageal sphincter is not completely relaxed whenever there is contractions in the body of the esophagus. So remember, achalasia means failure to relax. It's a Greek word, uncommon. And why this is there, this condition? Pathologically, there is loss of ganglion cells in the myenteric or Auerbach's plexus. Why there is loss of ganglion cells? Till date it is not known clearly. But yes, we are sure there is loss of or reduced number of ganglion cells in the myenteric or Auerbach's plexus, also known as Auerbach's plexus. There are a few differential diagnoses regarding this achalasia. Remember these three conditions: the Chagas disease, achalasia, and Hirschsprung disease. In South America, the Trypanosoma cruzi parasite, it causes Chagas disease, chronic infection, and usually the symptoms and features are similar to achalasia. Similarly, although the site is different, in Chagas disease and achalasia, site is esophagus. In achalasia and Hirschsprung, the site is esophagus versus colon. So what are the differentiating points between achalasia and Hirschsprung disease? In achalasia, there is dilated esophagus. In Hirschsprung disease of colon, there is dilated colon. Achalasia, few ganglion cells are there. There is not complete absence of ganglion cells. Whereas the ganglion cells are normally present in dilated proximal part of colon in Hirschsprung. In achalasia, distal part of the esophagus within normal limits means having ganglion cells, whereas the distal part of colon in Hirschsprung disease, that is diseased, means constricted, and it is the aganglionic segment. Again, very important question as an MCQ in your PGME. The distal part of colon in Hirschsprung disease is aganglionic. The proximal part is dilated but having normal ganglion cells. Whenever we are going to do an endoscopy, we have taken the muscle biopsy, and the muscle histology will reveal that there is reduced number of ganglion cells, especially the inhibitory neurons are reduced in number, with features suggestive of chronic inflammation, fibrosis. A terminology is there, that is vigorous achalasia. It is known as vigorous achalasia. It is usually seen basically in an early stage of disease where there is neural fibrosis and there is inflammatory signs. The features are there of inflammation. But the important thing is, as this is an early stage of disease of achalasia, there is almost normal, near normal number of ganglion cells. The ganglion cells numbers are within normal limits, known as vigorous achalasia. In achalasia, these are the important points. Remember the first two important points. There must be a non-relaxing lower esophageal sphincter along with absent peristalsis in body of esophagus. And sometimes they are not coordination. They are not in coordination. The non-relaxing LOS and absent peristalsis in esophageal body. In earlier stages, sometimes the contractile activity we can see with a normal lumen esophagus, but yes, even in earlier stages, there is no peristalsis in the body of the esophagus. And patient usually complains of sense of food sticking. And why there is sense of food sticking? Due to uncoordinated contractions of esophageal body with the lower esophageal sphincter, resulting in pain, leading to this sensation. As the time passes, this esophagus dilates, and finally the contractions what we were having in earlier stages that disappear. And mainly the esophagus is going to be emptied mainly by hydrostatic pressure of its contents, but it is always incomplete. And most of the time there is presence of residual food and fluid inside the esophageal lumen in achalasia. The stomach gas bubble is frequently absent. One of the important sign on radiology, the stomach gas bubble is not usually seen in achalasia. Why not seen? Because there is no bolus that is going to pass the lower esophageal sphincter along with its gas, leading to the presence of the stomach bubble. So, stomach gas bubble is absent in achalasia. Another important condition is megaesophagus. The esophagus becomes tortuous, and due to esophagitis, retention esophagitis means there is always some residual food is there, fluid is there, and it is causing persistent inflammation of that local area due to fermentation of food residues, leading to megaesophagus. And it is one of the important factor that the patients who are having megaesophagus along with achalasia, there is increased incidence of carcinoma of esophagus. So we must rule out carcinoma of esophagus in these type of patients. How to rule out carcinoma of esophagus? Obviously by doing endoscopy and taking biopsy and send it for histology. There is another important term that is known as pseudoachalasia. It's basically the similar disorder. The symptoms are almost same, but the important thing is there is some distal obstruction. Distal obstruction could be because of adenocarcinoma of the cardia of the stomach, or at this level some benign tumors may be there, leading to achalasia like disorder, the symptoms. And this condition is known as pseudoachalasia. Sometimes even the malignancies from bronchus and pancreas, in these patients also we can see the symptoms of pseudoachalasia. Achalasia is basically a disease of middle age, but although it is seen in middle age group, we can see the whole range of a spectrum, and any age may suffer from this achalasia. In early stages, pain and dysphagia is common, so sometimes it could be mistaken for GORD, although it is usually associated with gastroesophageal reflux disease. So we must rule out GORD. We have already discussed this GORD. Due to mild symptoms, usually the patient is just taking medications by self and not presenting to the hospital or the qualified physician and remain untreated for years. So usually the presentation is late in achalasia. Especially at night, these patients may aspirate due to frequent regurgitation seen in achalasia. So be careful and always advise the patient for this symptom, and always take the history of frequent regurgitation in these type of patients. As far as the diagnosis of achalasia is concerned, the diagnosis is suspected at endoscopy if we are going to have two important points: a presence of a tight cardia, the tone is increased, incomplete relaxation is there, along with food residue in the esophagus, the remaining food residue. Two important things are there: tight cardia and presence of residual food. On barium study, the radiography, this is going to show the hold up in distal esophagus. The barium is there in the distal esophagus. Why? Because there is incomplete relaxation of LOS along with the features of abnormal contractions in esophageal body, uncoordinated action of esophageal body contractions with lower esophageal sphincter relaxation. And this is the classical one, the bird's beak appearance. Again, important point for your PGME. On barium study, it is suggestive of presence of achalasia. Bird's beak appearance means there is tapering structure in distal esophagus. But remember, if this distal esophagus tapering structure, the border is wavy or rough, not smooth, it may be suggestive of presence of lower esophageal carcinoma of esophagus. So must rule out C esophagus. Although this, if the margins are smooth, the bird's beak appearance is usually suggestive of achalasia. Gastric gas bubble, again usually absent. We have already discussed it. And sometimes in few patients, even there are no features. Even endoscopy is within normal limits. Radiology is within normal limits. But yes, intermittently, patient is having the symptoms, and if we are in dilemma, the diagnosis can be confirmed on esophageal manometry. So we are going to use esophageal manometry for confirmation. And what could be the possible findings? Lower esophageal sphincter does not relax completely on swallowing. There is no peristalsis in the esophagus. And resting pressure of the esophagus is raised, although in upper normal range, but it is raised. These three important points are there. Incomplete relaxation of lower esophageal sphincter, absence of peristalsis, and resting pressure of esophagus raised. Esophageal manometry. Diagnosis we can confirm. As far as the treatment is concerned, this achalasia, there are basically 4 methods. The upper 2 methods, the patients suffering from achalasia, they respond very well to treatment. The upper 2 methods, that is forceful dilatation of cardia, endoscopic dilatation, and Heller's myotomy. These 2 important methods are there. In addition, sometimes just to gain some time for definitive treatment, or if there are some contraindications to surgery, we can use botulinum toxin as well as some drugs for transient relief. Let's discuss the first one, the pneumatic dilatation. In this procedure, we are going to stretch the cardia with the balloon. And what is the purpose? We want to disrupt the muscle. We want to decrease the tone of that particular local site. So we can do it by distending a balloon there. And we are going to make the lower esophageal sphincter less competent. Plummer was the person who first described it. And for this, we are using plastic balloons with different controlled, precise external diameter plastic balloons are there. And we can use for this purpose. And the special thing about these plastic balloons is that if pressure in the balloon is going to be too high, this is not going to expand further. It has been designed like that it is going to split along its length and it will rupture just to prevent the complications. So if pressure is too high, it will split along its length. Most commonly we are going to use the balloons with diameter 30 to 40 millimeter. It is usually inserted over a guide wire, and in 30, if we are using 30 millimeter balloon, the perforation of the esophagus, the incidence is almost less than 0.5%. But yes, it is possible, the esophageal perforation. Previously we have discussed one of the cause, the endoscopy. The endoscopic intervention, one of the cause for esophageal perforation. We have discussed the management also. So one of the major complication of pneumatic dilatation in eclasia is esophageal perforation. Remember this. And this risk increases with bigger balloons. Means if you are using 40 balloons, a greater risk as compared to 30 millimeter. In almost 75 to 85% of cases, the forceful dilatation is curative. And if patient's age is more than 45 years, we're having better results. And another important complication of this pneumatic dilatation as well as Heller's myotomy, another complication could be the post-operative reflux, the gastroesophageal reflux. The second important topic in the treatment, the first one was pneumatic dilatation. The second one is Heller's myotomy. In this procedure, we are going to cut the muscles of lower esophagus and the cardia of the stomach, a small part, let's say 1 to 2 centimeter, not more than that. One of the major complications of this Heller's myotomy is reflux disease. So to prevent this post-operative complication, one operation we can opt for, that is known as Heller-Dors operation. We are going to add on a partial anterior fundoplication. We have already discussed in management of gastroesophageal reflux disease, if you remember this. If not, go back to that interaction and once again revise it. So Heller-Dors operation done for eclasia with GORD. So to prevent it, add partial fundoplication, anterior one, so known as Heller-Dors operation. Usually it is done by laparoscopic approach, the preferable one. But yes, if this technique is or expertise is not available in the institute or the hospital, we can go for an open approach also. During this procedure, we can use endosonography, the ultrasound through endoscopic route. Why we are going to use it? To know the extent of myotomy first. The second, to ensure that we have abolished the narrow segment of eclasia. Now the procedure is complete. So for confirming this and to know how much we are going to extend the myotomy, up to what level over the stomach area, so as to not injure the stomach mucosa. The ideal thing is just cut the muscle up to that extent so that the esophageal, the mucosa is going to pop up, and this popped up mucosa of the esophagus, it will not let the margins heal together. This Heller's myotomy is successful in more than 90% of cases, and so one of the indication could be if we have repeatedly if we are having a patient who is having repeatedly failed pneumatic dilatation, one of the indication in that patient, another choice could be Heller's myotomy. Another option is botulinum toxin, usually injected through the endoscopic route into the lower esophageal sphincter site. And what is the mechanism of action of this botulinum toxin? It interferes with the excitatory neural activity, cholinergic activity at lower esophageal sphincter site. It interferes with that. Although the effect of this botulinum toxin is not permanent, so repeated injections are required after a few months. So only indication of this botulinum toxin eclasia you can remember is if the patient is not fit for surgery. That is elderly patients with other comorbid conditions, not fit for definitive surgery. So use botulinum toxin. Few drugs can also be used. For example, nifedipine, the calcium channel antagonists. But for the long-term use, these are ineffective. But if we want to buy some time for definitive treatment, if we have postponed the definitive treatment for some reason, give sublingual nifedipine to the patient. It is effective for a transient time, small time we can have, and after that the definitive treatment is required. So just to summarize the achalasia, what we have discussed till now, it is uncommon, not very commonly seen, common in middle age group due to selective loss of inhibitory neurons in lower esophagus in coordination between the lower esophagus sphincter and the body of esophagus contractility. The achalasia is there. The other causes of dysphagia must be excluded. One of the important causes, carcinoma of the esophagus, it must be excluded. And treatment, the two important treatment you must remember, the endoscopic pneumatic dilatation, and if it fails or indicated, the surgical myotomy, that is Heller's myotomy. So that is all for this interaction. Thank you so much. And in the next interaction, we'll discuss the other motility disorders of esophagus. Any question, you can write it to me without any hesitation. Thank you.